Hello, hello, I'm Kelly, and this is Slightly Better, the show where we show up with a million things on our plates and we're just trying to keep growing, trying to get better, whatever that means for you, whether it's better communication, better habits, better boundaries, getting better at letting things go. We're your people, okay? We're not here to strive for perfection, but we are here to strive for progress all the time. And I am so excited about today's episode. My guest today is Dede Halfhill, and Dede is a retired U.S. Air Force colonel and leadership consultant. So Dede's approach to leadership is not just about titles or systems. It's about understanding human behavior, building trust, and creating environments where people actually want to show up and do their best work. So if you've ever been frustrated by leadership that feels more like control than support, poor communication, disconnection, you will find this conversation really refreshing. Dede combines military experience with real emotional intelligence, and she brings a direct, refreshing perspective on what it really takes to lead people well. This episode might make you think differently about what leadership really even means and what it could look like in your life. So let's get into it, my conversation with Dede Halfhill. I am
Thank
beyond
you.
excited to talk to you today. So I want to introduce you to my listeners who may not have stalked you as much as I have. Um, so tell us about your experience, your work. I know you spent 25 years in the United States Air Force. I would love to hear about that, how you got into that, and go from there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's so nice to meet you and to be here with you this afternoon. I always love these conversations, so thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I spent 25 years in the Air Force, loved every second of it, but kind of how that leads to where I am today. I started to notice throughout my career that, as leaders, we were being asked to do really hard things, as we were asked to meet people in some really hard moments. As you're leading in a place like the United States military, it comes with its own fair share of emotional experiences. I deployed twice to Iraq. I was working for very senior leaders. And what I really started to notice was that because we had had so little training in the emotional experience of leadership, we were guarding against it because it's a hard, messy space. Like, let's be real, people can be hard and messy. And because we had had so little training in the emotional reality of what we were going through, what we were experiencing, we were ill prepared to handle it. And because we were ill prepared to address some of the things we needed to address, we guarded against it and showed up in ways that were unhelpful and unproductive. So I started to dig into the work of Dr. Brené Brown. You talk about stalking, like I stalked everything she wrote, every video she did, every interview. And I was really, what it did was it gave me the language I needed to be able to identify what was happening, both for me as a leader and really starting to recognize some of the emotional undercurrent of the behaviors I was seeing on my team. And so I really used her work for about the last 15 years of my career and stumbled through it sometimes, showed up in ways that were contrary to her work sometimes, and really just started to realize, like, wow, this is a conversation we all need to be having. Like, if you are asked to lead, you deserve to have a conversation. You deserve training. You deserve leaders who can help model this kind of this understanding of leading, the skills and the knowledge we need to lead, understanding that experience and that emotional undercurrent. And so I started to do that more and more in the Air Force. And when I retired, started to do that full time. And so now I work with leaders. I go out and I speak to organizations, speak at conferences, work with teams to really help them to lean into this space and learn a different way of leading than has been modeled to us by those we were led by. And it's not their fault. They just weren't taught that either. And so, kind of like parenting, right? Like, we're learning so much more about parenting, and it's really different than the way our parents parented us. But our parents didn't have the internet to really kind of level base the experience and level base some of the hard lessons that we've learned through research, that we've learned just by, evolution as we evolve in both leading and parenting. So I kind of see them both very similarly.
I fully agree. I would love to even get more into that in a little bit. So when you started to like absorb Brene Brown's work and use it in your work, was
Mm-hmm.
there some sort of turning point where you felt like this is working or this is what I need to do? Like, were you met with resistance? How did that go for you to try it to start to lead in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, I think with any new skill, right, you kind of, the best way to do it, and I know you and I were talking beforehand about jumping off the deep end,
Hmm.
and there are certainly some things we want to jump off the deep end with, but when it comes to understanding things like vulnerability, understanding how we show up when we're feeling a hard emotion like shame, understanding what it looks like when we are trying to navigate our own uncertainty, our own insecurity, it was kind of an evolution for me. I didn't jump off the deep end per
Hmm.
se. Like I didn't wake up one day and was like, I'm going to be a leader who can completely navigate vulnerability. Like I started in very small ways. At first, I was just noticing my own behavior and I was doing my own work. And then as I got more comfortable, and here's the truth about any of this space, the more work we do on ourselves, the better equipped we are to hold space for others who maybe either are just starting, maybe haven't done that work, or maybe haven't even been exposed to it. Like the more patient we are with ourselves, which comes from often doing our own work, we have a degree of self compassion that comes with that. The more we are able to do that, the more we're able to do that for others. So, as I was learning more about her work and trying to apply that work to my own leadership experience, it was just kind of small baby steps,
Hmm.
one after the other. I would maybe like, after I had done my own work and I was more comfortable, I would start to say like, hey, let's talk about how vulnerable this can feel for us. And I would just start to use the language.
Yeah.
And then the more I used the language, the more comfortable I was going deeper into my own feeling of vulnerability, or going deeper into my own feelings of maybe I'm not good enough, or like, these shame narratives, which are, who do you think you are? You're not good enough, that you don't belong, kind of thing. And so it just happened bit by bit over the years.
Yeah.
It was interesting because she talks, Dr. Brene Brown talks a lot about vulnerability and shame. And when I first started exploring her work, I could talk about vulnerability, but I couldn't talk about shame.
Mm.
Like, even that was a bridge too far for me. And I remember in 2019, we were building a course for our incoming squadron commanders. And we were going to use some of this work as a foundation to that program. And I said, yeah, we can use the vulnerability piece, but let's not talk about shame. Like, that's
Mm.
just too much. But the truth is, like, if we're going to talk about anything, it's the shame we need to be
Yeah,
talking about, right?
definitely.
And so I had to, even there, continue to grow. And it wasn't until like a year, probably a year later, when I was leading a different team, where I was like, let's talk about shame, right? Let's talk about where we might be doubting our own ability, where we're wondering if we're good enough, where we question if we belong here. And so
Yeah.
it was just step by step.
Wow. And there's definitely something to be said about a level of self awareness that you have to have in order to even go there, right? Like
Yes.
you have to
Yeah.
be so, I feel like you have to be so aware of, and I can say this like as a parent, I find a lot of parallels between what you talk about leading in the military or leading even corporate teams, leading anything, and leading a family, leading children. Like you have to face your own shadows, like you have to face your own shit if you
Mhm.
want to confidently help other people bring that to the surface so that you can lead them. And it's dark,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
scary, and it's so uncomfortable. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Like it's one thing to be vulnerable and talk about how you feel, but it's another to address that like I feel like a failure all the time because my mom said X, Y, and Z or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can imagine, well, I would love to ask you, um, did you receive any like pushback as a woman to be doing this?
Yeah. Yes and no. Here's
Mhm.
what there in some spaces, yes, and then in other spaces, no. It was funny because you mentioned you saw the podcast with Simon Sinek, and I shared, even Simon shared in that podcast that we've been friends for a really long time.
Mhm.
And he was at the Pentagon one day, and we were having lunch in the food court, and I was excited about this work, and I was telling him all about Brené Brown and the idea of vulnerability. And at that point, he hadn't really even, I don't think he had heard of her yet at that point. And he said, you cannot be talking about vulnerability in the United States military. Like,
Wow.
it just won't be received well. And to his credit, he was right. At that time, it was probably a bridge still too far. Like, Brene hadn't, she was on the scene, but she hadn't exploded the way she did later, in the next few years when she really exploded, and we kind of started, she really normalized the conversation around vulnerability. But at that point, certainly my community, was not aware of her. And so it forced me, and I'm really grateful, it forced me to think about, how do I talk about vulnerability without using the word vulnerability,
Mm.
until I can get them comfortable with the idea of it, so that we can start naming it
Yeah.
appropriately. Because I do believe you have to name it appropriately to really learn to navigate it. But like with all things, we have to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
And my community, meeting them where they are, was really about, more so talking about the discomfort, more so talking about the uncertainty, more talking about the risk. In fact, I just met with um, senior leaders, all men, and it was on the whole workshop was on vulnerability and values. And I knew if I went in there gangbusters speaking about vulnerability with this group of men who also have not heard of Dr. Brown, I would have lost them. So I led into it first talking about what Dr. Brown actually describes vulnerability as: risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure.
Yeah.
And when you can talk about it in that language, then you get, everyone can understand risk. Everyone understands uncertainty. And we all know what it means to like really care about something, right? So, in that sense, I think, because you had asked me about being a woman, in that sense, while I was comfortable with the language, probably because as a woman, I think we're societally more conditioned to understand the emotional spectrum.
Yeah.
So where I was comfortable with it as a woman, my environment, the majority of the people in my environment, men, probably would not have been. But then that's where I say, it was kind of yes and no, because they also didn't look at me funny for talking about feelings, because I'm a woman. They almost expected me to talk about
Oh,
feelings.
okay.
And then I think in some ways I felt bad because I encountered a lot of men who I think were perfectly comfortable talking about it, even wanted to talk about it, but were not given permission because society has told men that it's weak to do so.
Mm.
And so for them to do it, I think they ran into different hurdles than I did. So I could be vulnerable in a way men couldn't, which means because I could be it, I could talk about it. I'm not sure if that answers the question
Yeah.
in a roundabout
No,
way.
I see what you mean. And I think at the root of it is connection. Like you're able to connect with them in order to lead them, in order to bring out of them, maybe a level of vulnerability without even saying it. But because you were able to connect with them and, like you said, meet them where they are, now they're going to feel safe to be there with you. And I know you've talked about that as connection as like the foundation of leadership. And, I think that's something that's missing in a lot of places, whether it's maybe historically the military or corporate environments. And so with your work, have you been able to see a big difference like in certain environments by leading maybe with connection? And I always say, even as a parent, I always say like connect before I correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I love it.
Yeah. So, yeah, like what kind of difference have you started to see as a result of some of this work?
I mean, I think by a long shot, I have seen a comfort shift with even being aware of the word and aware of our need to navigate it, and as leaders to lean into it more. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like I said, when Simon and I were having lunch at the Pentagon, it had to have been maybe 2011, and nobody was talking about vulnerability then. When I left the military in 2021, it was a language I was hearing more and more from all kinds of leaders. But here's a really interesting point. I was sitting next to a fellow colonel at our, we called it Group Commanders course, which is a course you go to in preparation for an upcoming command opportunity. And I was sitting next to him and I was sharing with him some of this work, just my thoughts on the whole idea of how we lead through this space. And he was like, yeah, I think you're totally right. Like, we need to be having this conversation. And I was really surprised at how open he was to it. Because to be honest, he was the first one I had encountered that was really open to it. And I said, tell me, like, how did you get here? Like, what led you to this space? And he's an amazing leader. And what he shared with me was that he had been in the bombing at Khobar Towers. And because of that experience and that day, he watched as people he knew were hurt very badly, right? He had seen, we had lost several service members in that bombing. He watched the aftermath of that bombing. And so, in some ways, it really broke him open. And it, you know, that aligns with a lot of the work we hear on PTSD. Sometimes you have post-traumatic stress that causes you to shut down. And sometimes you have post-traumatic stress that causes you to grow. And so in his case, he was very much on that growth side. And it gave him a comfort with his own humanity, that he was able to see the humanity in others. And so I started paying attention to that. And then I realized that another leader that I had worked with years prior, his name was General Robin Rand, an amazing leader. He was a 4-star general when he retired. I had worked for him when he was a colonel. And he was a great leader then. I loved working for him. You know, like he was a mentor for the rest of my career. But he had gone to Iraq in, I think it was, say, I probably have that year wrong, but he was the commander of a base over there where the hospital was located at Balad Air Base in Iraq. And it was the first hospital to which all of the wounded were brought in before they could be evacuated to Baghdad and then evacuated to Landstuhl. And so he was kind of their first line of medical defense. And he would go to the hospital every day and talk to the wounded service members, men, women, you know, airmen, soldiers, Marines, sailors. And when he came home, he was a different person. And I didn't really have a language for it, but he could stand up in front of a crowd and he could bring you to tears.
Mm.
And people just gravitated to him. And I was like, what is it that he's doing? Because he was a great leader and a great speaker when I first worked for him, but he was never bringing any of us to tears, you know? And I told him that, so I'm not saying anything I wouldn't say to him up front, right? But I was like, what is he doing? And what I realized is in almost all of his presentations, he was speaking to our humanity, and he was speaking to the emotional part of us. He wasn't just up there sharing facts and figures and data. He was really speaking to the truth of who we all are. And after I had had that conversation with my friend Mike about the Khobar's tower bombing, I realized, like, wow, I think that's also what happened with General Rand. He was in this leadership experience in which he was seeing the rawest moments of our humanity. And it broke him open in a way. And I asked him about it eventually, and we had a great conversation. And he said, I've never thought about it, but I'm sure that's probably part of it. You know, like when you go through something like that, it changes who you are. And what broke my heart the most was that women have been given permission to stay in that space regardless. But men, it's almost as if men have to go through a traumatic experience before they can open up their heart and humanity the same way. And I think that is so unfair. It is just so unfair that men have to wait and go through something horrific before they, one, accept their own humanity, and two, are given permission by whomever, maybe themselves, that they can also lead that way. And we shouldn't have to wait for trauma to give you those skills. We should give you those skills up front.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think everyone would agree that that's how it is in society for men. And even for men who seem open, it can be really hard for them to access that. And I think that what the story you just told comes down to, or the result of what happened to him, and now he can go on to be a more intentional leader. But those societal expectations, is that like shame? Like, would that be like if a man feels that he, for some reason, can't, whatever it is, whether it's society or his father told him that, is that what you would say is a shame narrative?
Most of us believe that vulnerability is weakness, that to be vulnerable is being weak, when really it's the exact opposite. That when you can be vulnerable, it is your greatest measure of courage, right? Because it is incredibly hard to lean into that vulnerability. Here's another story that I think really makes that point. I was working with an organization, and we were doing a workshop to which, in which we were going to talk about vulnerability, and we were going to explore how it shows up for us in crisis situations, because this organization is in crisis response. And so most often when I go into an organization, I will ask the team lead or whomever to do assigned seating. And on this particular day, I forgot, or for this particular workshop, I forgot to ask for assigned seating. And so I'm standing there and I'm watching people come in. And as they're coming in, I'm watching, one or two guys sit at tables with women. But the majority of the guys in the program were all going to one table in the far back, like as far away from my table, my podium, as they
Mm.
could get, right? Like they were on the direct opposite, like get as far away from her as I can. And I thought,
Physically and mentally.
yeah. And I was like, oh, shoot, I forgot to do assigned seating. And here's what happened. In the very first exercise I do, it's this small exercise where you have to look at another person for like 2 minutes. You're having a conversation face to face for 2 minutes. And within 30 seconds, I walked over near this table and I heard them, and they were no longer talking about the exercise. They were talking about football. And it was really interesting to me. And I thought, wow, like we're not even 30 seconds in, and they're already moving past the exercise. And so what I realized that day is if you get a group of men and something vulnerable happens, sorry, that allergies, something vulnerable happens. If there is one man in the group that is uncomfortable with going there, they will gatekeep it and make sure nobody in the group goes there. They will make it unsafe to express vulnerability. They will make it unsafe to have conversations that are vulnerable. And throughout this entire day, I watched this happen with this group, with every conversation, with every exercise. I could never pinpoint who it was, but somebody at that table said, no, we will not. We will not have these conversations, not in those words,
Yeah.
right? But they made it very clear that we're not having these conversations. We're not going there. And so nobody did. Later that day, one of the guys came up to me and he said, almost in tears, like, my brother was in the military. He was a Marine and he was killed. So here's this man sharing something with me that's very vulnerable that he wouldn't share at his table.
Mm.
Now, I went home that night, just coincidentally. I went home that night and I had a friend who was a 2-star who on a regular basis would call me suicidal. And he felt like he had nobody he could talk to. And he would tell me, I don't know who else I can talk to about this. And I would say, please go get some help. And he would say, I can't get help. In the military, it's a very common narrative. I can't get help. I'll lose my clearance. I can't get help. They'll think I'm not capable. And so he was leaning on me to be that space for him. And candidly, like, I'm not equipped for that. So I was telling him, go get help. And I thought, it's so sad because here's this man who feels alone. There's no other men he can turn to. He doesn't know how to reach out and connect. He doesn't have family because those bridges had been burned long ago. And at the same time, I spent an entire day with a group of men who couldn't even have a conversation about what they were noticing in the other person because even that was too vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I thought, men do this to men because for the men who were at the tables with women, no problems at all. They opened right up.
Yeah.
And that's sad. That's really sad. It's heartbreaking.
You talk about courage in leadership a lot. And I think it truly is one of the bravest things you can do is to face your own vulnerability and ask for help when you need it or to let others be open with you, and I'm wondering, like, how can somebody who maybe like that, whoever's gatekeeping the conversation to increase their effectiveness as a leader, how can they become a little bit more courageous, or how can they start to have a little bit more self-leadership in the way that would create better leadership experience for people they are in charge of or within their charge?
Yeah, I get the question a lot because I have a lot of empathy for a lot of compassion for these men who are maybe my age or older. I'm 51. And it wasn't a conversation that was modeled for us, right? Like, it just wasn't something I was taught growing up. And certainly I think I'm pretty safe in saying my male peers, it was certainly not a conversation they had modeled for them. And, I'm not naive. And I think I can talk about this till I'm blue in the face, but men need to hear it from other men. Like, it will only be safe when men hear it from other men. So I often really encourage men who are comfortable sharing to share, because those who are still buying into the myths that they can't get help. And, I get called into, I'll sidetrack here for just a second. I'll get called into the construction industry. I get called into organizations in the construction industry a lot because construction, law enforcement, and military are 3 of the top 4 occupations with high suicide rates. Like, they're 3 of the 4 highest in the country. And right now I'm blanking on the 4th. But, so industries like law enforcement, like military, have been told that you can't get help because it will be detrimental to your career. While at the same time, leaders of these industries are trying so hard to fight that myth, that narrative. And until other men see men they respect, men who are senior to them, until they see them getting help and them being open about their struggles, they will never believe what these senior leaders are trying to tell them. Like, you can't tell, you almost have to show. And so I often will ask men who are willing, who have gone through the hard work, who are brave enough to do so, to share their own story. And I often point people to a couple other male-led podcasts that are male-led podcasts for men. So it's men talking to men. One of my favorites is Everyman. It's EVRY. They leave
Hmm.
out the E. So EVRYMAN, Everyman. And they've had some great guests on there who are in these really high stressed, high threat, very male dominated industries, talking about what it means to kind of navigate struggle. I think there's a myth that to be brave means we're never afraid. Like you always
Yeah.
hear, I mean, if I see one more book with the title Be Fearless, like there is no such thing.
Yeah.
And I think that gives us this myth that, oh, if I wasn't afraid to do it, then I would do it. But the truth is, you're never going to, if it really matters, there's probably always going to be a degree of fear, right? Or uncertainty. I'll give you a great example. It's kind of a funny example, but I've been in this space. I've been trying to lead this way. I now teach these skills. I'm out working with leaders on really being able to identify these undercurrents within us. And I was recently contacted by a former, another person in the Air Force. I wouldn't say a coworker because he was much senior to me. But he is now the director of college football playoffs. And so that's the organization that is responsible for the selection committee or for the selection of the teams that are going to be playing in the college football playoffs, right? And so he asked if I would come out and meet with the selection committee that's going to be choosing this year's teams. And I had such a story in my head that, oh, I don't know anything about football. And I talk about vulnerability. What am I going to go out there and talk? These men are going to laugh me out of the room, and I've worked with men, and I was just spinning myself up into a narrative of I'm not the right person. I can't do this. I don't want to get in front of this group of esteemed individuals, right? Like they were just all of them accomplished in their own right in such amazing ways. And so I was really afraid. And I'm not going to lie, like I tried to talk him out of bringing me in. I was like, I don't think I'm the person for you. I don't think they're going to want to, the workshop I traditionally do. I don't think they're going to want to do it. And I was giving him every reason under the sun why he should pick somebody else. And he was just kind of ignoring my my pleas to please don't pick me. And I said, I'll tell you what, I will send you the questions that we will explore as part of this workshop. And my hope was that he would see these questions and be like, oh, heck no, we're not talking about that, and I would be off the hook. And he didn't let me off the hook. And so I went in and it ended up being an amazing conversation because I can't think of a group of people that is navigating risk and uncertainty and how much they really care about the institution of college football than this selection committee, right? Like it's billions of dollars on the line. And so they're navigating uncertainty and risk all year long. And they're navigating ridicule. So the workshop went great. My point though is that courage doesn't mean we're never afraid. It means that even though sometimes we might be really brave, there's always going to be moments when we fall back and we're not. There's always going to be something else that makes us feel vulnerable. I can get up on a stage and speak to 2,000 people and not feel vulnerable at all. But getting up in front of that room of 13 people, I felt incredibly vulnerable and I felt a ton of fear. But I was like, it's important to do and I'm going to do it anyway, And then it turned out to be great, which is what usually happens.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's what usually happens, like pretty much 100% of the time.
I know.
And I think it's interesting to do this work in various industries, like coming from the military and then to go into like football or construction or anything like that. Like I didn't even think about that. All these different industries that you can service just by honestly getting down to a human level. And it's almost like you don't have to learn more, you have to unlearn and you have to kind of let go of so much more than you even need to pick up in
Yeah,
order to lead more effectively. That's what I think.
100%. Like you said it perfectly. You have to unlearn before you can learn. There's so many narratives we have been exposed to growing up that are no longer serving us. They're
Mm,
just no longer helpful.
yeah.
Here's something that I tell because, again, I go into organizations that are entirely different than the one I grew up in. But what I always say to people is that what you do may be unique, but your humanity is not.
Mm,
And what that came from was I would watch facilitators come into the military and they would be trying to help us. And I would watch military members who were probably uncomfortable with the vulnerability of it. And the way they protected against that is they would say, well, you just don't understand our business. You don't understand what it is we do here. You don't understand the pressures we're under. And because I was in the military, I could kind of be like, bullshit.
yeah.
Like they're not here because they understand the military. They're here because they understand your humanity
Mm,
and you are opting out. And so you're only hurting yourselves. And so I would get up and I would start saying that, like, listen, what we do is unique. I will give you that. But our humanity is not. We all have to navigate risk. We all have to navigate uncertainty. We're all afraid. We all question our own ability. We all have doubt. We all experience love. We all experience heartbreak. And so quit lying to yourself and saying that they can't help you because they don't understand what it's like to deploy.
yeah.
It's kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
So I have never I have never had to pull a gun on someone in self-defense. So can I understand that exact feeling? No. But can I understand the fear, the uncertainty, the unbelievable adrenaline? Like I can understand the human experience, the human reaction to that, right? The so much of it. And so I I always tell people, what you do may be unique. Your humanity is not.
Yeah. That's so good. And I like your slogan because I was on your website, Master the Unseen. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I love it. It's kind of new, so thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a long time to figure out, like, what am I out here trying to say? Because I've definitely been heavily influenced by Dr. Brown, but she's not the only person who has influenced me, right? And so I started to like really think about what is it I'm trying to really share with people. And Master the Unseen is really about the fact that as leaders, we are asked to we're asked to be responsible for a lot, whether that's the bottom line, whether, the profit and loss, or in our case, people's lives. And we spend all of our time, therefore, tracking metrics, right? How are we doing on productivity? How are we doing on operational output, finance, whatever it may be. And because we are so ill equipped with the emotional space, there is an emotional undercurrent happening in all of our organizations. Like it is there, whether we want to see it or not. But because we are ill equipped to see it, we're even more ill equipped to navigate it. So we push it aside or we just ignore it. But what's happening is that undercurrent is affecting all the things we are responsible for. So in some ways, we're sticking our heads in the sand. If as a leader if as a leader you avoid addressing people's feelings and you avoid talking about emotion because it's messy and it's hard, you're actually abdicating responsibility for the things you've been entrusted to lead. You're abdicating responsibility for them being as good as they could be.
Hmm.
And so if you can master that space, if you can master what it means to see it, to navigate it, I think in today's day and age, you have an unmatched advantage because so many leaders right now don't have it. So
Yeah.
if you can learn it, if you can sit in that discomfort And it's actually so much easier than we think it's going to be. When you can sit in that space and not opt out, you are going to have an outsized advantage. And I believe that 100%. And so, like, as a military leader, it was more like, listen, you're not dealing with the hard shit you should be dealing with, which means you're not being your results aren't as good as they could be. Should be. I wouldn't even say could be. They should be, because you're not doing the hard stuff that we actually need you to do.
Yeah. You can see it if you want to see it.
Yes.
Like if you're intentional enough to look and say, what's going on with my team? What can I do? And obviously you need to be a little bit more aware, and like to relate it to parenthood. Like, well, I know that if my daughter is acting out in a way, or if she's not doing what she normally does or what's expected, I'm like, okay, she needs connection now. You know what I mean? Like, we need to now connect. And I don't say like, go make your bed. Why aren't you making your bed? Like, you have to ask good questions. You have to say like, I see you're not doing this. Can you tell me what's making you feel that you don't want to do this?
Yeah.
Like, it's so simple.
Yeah.
It's absolutely not easy.
Yeah, but I also have a lot of, this is where I say, like, I have a lot of compassion for those. I might have sounded a second ago like I was really riding leaders hard, and I am in some ways. And I have a lot of compassion for them because, like, who taught them? And all they know, or most of us have experienced, if I don't feel equipped to address an emotion, to do so will only make it worse. When really, if we could just learn there are some really simple skills that take all that pressure off. And I'll be honest with you, like, as a leader, I thought I had to have all the answers, and I thought I had to be giving direction. But when I learned these skills, and it was skills like curiosity, when it was skills like listening, when I could skills like observation versus accepting that as like a reflection of me, when I could just observe someone in a hard moment versus taking their hard moment and making it about me, my lack of whatever, right? When I learned those skills, leading became 1,000 times easier. And it actually is so simple. But those leaders, I'm pretty confident that most of those leaders were never taught how to really sit down and listen with empathy. They were never taught how to ask really good questions like the one you just shared, right? Like, help me understand what's going on for you. And so they're in this really hard space right now because no one modeled it, but yet it's being expected of them.
Right.
And they don't know that if I can just get some support, it's going to be 10 times easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So what happens if we see more, let's say, corporations mastering the unseen? What do you think would happen in a perfect world?
Yeah. Oh man, I think first and foremost, what corporations most want is, I think we would see innovation come alive. Because when you can navigate your team's emotional space, trust builds, accountability builds, courage builds. And when you have trust and courage and accountability, man, sky's the limit. Because, engagement increases. I can't think of the word right now, but people, like, retention, that's it. Retention increases because we know by all the research, people don't leave a bad job because of the work. They leave a job because of bad leadership. And so I've done some really crappy jobs. I was in the military for 25 years. I've had some of the crappiest jobs. And I stayed because I was working with really great and fun people, or I was working for really amazing people. More often than not, it was the former, because, I too have been exposed to unhelpful leadership. But I think if leaders could really sit in that space they would unlock. I mean, that's what I wouldn't be out here doing this if I didn't believe that. If you can really sit in that space and you increase trust and you increase excitement and engagement, you're going to have all the things we want: innovation, retention. You're going to, if you can make people feel seen, valued, and heard, you will have loyalty and commitment like you have never seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, to kind of wrap it up with maybe one or two questions, if you had to list maybe a few qualities of the most highly effective leaders, and I want to address like leaders in business, leaders in the military, leaders in homes and communities, across the board leadership, what would they be? Most effective.
Funny story. When ChatGPT first came out, when did it come out now? November 23, I think.
Oh, wow. I feel like, is it that long? Ever since COVID, I don't know what year it is.
I know. I think it was November 23
Yeah.
it first came out. My partner has been following the AI space for a long time. And so he, when it first came out, like the day it came out, was telling me about it. And I was like, oh, that same day I got an email from someone who said, hey, I'm getting ready to do a podcast. What do you think is the most important skill for leaders going forward? And I thought, oh. And so I was at home playing with ChatGPT, again, like the week it came out. And so I asked ChatGPT, what would you say is the most important skill for leaders going forward? And it immediately came back and said empathy. And I was like, damn.
Wow.
And then
it's light years ahead of us.
I know. And then I asked it, like, what does empathy, what do you mean by empathy? And what does it sound like? And what it gave me blew me away. So I would say, really, I'm thinking of 3 skills right now. I think empathy, and I don't know how I would rank these, but I think if I had to pick 3, I would say empathy, which is really understanding the emotional experience of another, right? You don't have to understand the actual experience, but you do. Empathy is understand the emotional undercurrent of an experience, right? So empathy, I think compassion for ourselves and for others. I mean, humanity, being a human is hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's only getting harder. And if we can have compassion for others, it encourages, the more compassion we have for others and ourselves, the more willing to be curious, which I think is the 3rd skill. Like, if I had to pick 3, those would be it. Be curious, be compassionate, and be empathetic.
Yeah. Yep. I would agree. Curiosity, you ask the right questions, or you ask questions to further your understanding, helping you become more compassionate, therefore empathetic. Yep. I love that. So, what's next for you? What are you doing?
Well, right now I'm still loving being in the keynote space.
Mm.
I get to go out and meet all kinds of different, it's so funny. There are so many different organizations out there and associations and like things I couldn't even have imagined working in the military for 25 years. So I am just enjoying really right now being out there with organizations, whether that be through keynote or through workshops and supporting them. And I kind of feel like, wow, I miss the challenge of the military. I miss the teamwork of the military. I miss kind of the fear, like that. Oh shit, is this going to work? I miss that adrenaline rush. I spent 25 years as a communication public affairs officer. So my whole career was in crisis. Like I was always the one talking to the media, usually when we had done something wrong. So it was always a crisis. And unfortunately or fortunately, I'm a little bit addicted to it. Call me a little bit of a crisis adrenaline junkie. So I'm starting to think about like, what else would I want to do? So I don't know. Stay tuned.
That's exciting.
I got some things on the horizon that I'm thinking about, maybe going back to school for, trying something new,
That's
stepping
awesome.
into a space that scares me.
Yeah, discomfort. My word of the year was discomfort. So just doing things that, are extremely uncomfortable, but that expand your life, expand your mind, and expand your capacity for all those things: curiosity, compassion, empathy, light.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I love that. Dede, thank you so much for your time. This was so valuable. I know my listeners are going to love this. I have listeners probably of, leaders in business, leaders, people who don't even consider themselves leaders. So I really hope, especially those people, can take some of what you said and apply it. Because I think the more people who, regardless of what you do, if you can access those three things, I think as a society, we'd be better off. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Oh, so much. Well, Kelly, thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Yes, I really appreciate it. Thank you.